This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday Twilight show. I'm your host, Michelle, and tonight I'm joined by an extraordinary guest, Miss Liz Free, an exemplary leader and educator. Together, we will continue the discussion on women in leadership. There's glass everywhere. We will explore how far we've come as women in leadership and the work left to be done. Stay tuned.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello there, and welcome once again to our very special Twilight show. It is indeed a joy to join you again to continue the discussion about women in leadership in education. And I've got a special guest joining me tonight. And while we wait for her to join us, I'd just like to do a little bit of reflection on why this particular show and what we did the last time. And first of all, the last show was on the 6th of March, and it was about women in leadership in education. And I had two very inspirational guests, very talented women who are at different stages of their careers in leadership and in education. And together we explored the challenges women faced in climbing the leadership ladder, especially in education, because we do know that women are making some gains in other sectors, and especially in the corporate world. But for whatever reason, in education, women are lagging behind a little bit, behind their male counterparts. So we talked about those invisible barriers that sometimes seems to stop women from getting to the zenith of their careers. We talked about those unsaid, unwritten rules, women being emotional and women potentially becoming mothers and therefore will not be able to fully commit to education or to the job. We talked about those things. We also talked about how sometimes we impede our own progress, that we lack the confidence and we don't believe that we can do it. We mentioned the fact that men will apply for a job even if they only have 30% of the qualifications, whereas women try to look to make sure that they have covered every single thing and every aspect of the job description before having the confidence to apply for the role, whereas men are a little bit more confident to do that. And so we had all these takeaways. We also talked about the imposter syndrome. Once you get into that role, you begin to feel as though you're still not qualified enough to do it, or why am I here? And one of our guests, Yolanda Biosa, said sometimes even before we enter the space to be interviewed, we're already questioning if we're meant to be there and if we're worthy of that position, and we go in with that defeatist attitude. So we talked about how to gain the confidence and to go in there and to be secure in our abilities as well. And so Yolanda was also saying that sometimes as women we just feel grateful that we've made it to the interview, and that's it. We're just grateful for that. But it's important that we see ourselves as worthy candidates and go forward and make ourselves available and respected by those on the interview panels. Another point that Yolande made, which is very, very interesting and one that I've held on to, was the fact that we should see and regard our emotions as our superpower, because these are the things and these are some of the qualities that really help us to be powerful and to be excellent leaders. And that is so important for us to embrace that. So I'm still waiting on my special guest, Liz, and I'm sure she will be joining us shortly. And then we could continue this discussion. But until she gets here, we will continue the discussion. And let me pause to welcome those who've already joined online. We've got Charlie. Welcome, Charlie. It's good to see you. And hopefully we'll hear your perspective as well, as we're talking about women in leadership. And it's not necessarily limited to education. Jamelia, it's lovely to have you. You said you agree. We have the same situation happening with a colleague at my workplace, with a person who oversold them and now can't pass the probation. They oversold themselves and now can't pass the probation. So, Jamelia, I don't know if you're referring here to a particular woman or it's a man who oversold themselves, but yes, we do have that. And I think you're probably referring to a male counterpart who will, yes. So they will oversell and this overconfidence and then unable to deliver. However, we're not suggesting that this is always the case, because you will find that as well amongst women. Anybody could do that. But what we're saying is that as women, we second guess ourselves, even when we have the skills to step up and to be successful. And these are some of the things we would like to continue the discussion with tonight. I'd like to just also pause to say thanks to those who've left some insightful feedback on the show from last time on the 6th, and to those who were inspired by it. Thank you so much for sharing that you have been inspired and that you've been thinking about your own situations as well. I think my guest is about to enter, and we look forward to hearing from her, because she is, as I said in my introduction, an extraordinary woman, and we would love to learn from her tonight. So we will continue the discussion and make sure that you all join in, send us your questions. We'd love to hear from you as well. So make sure to download the Podbean app so you can call us, you can discuss and share your ideas. I'm going to take a short break and listen to our sponsor. When we come back, I will introduce Liz to you and we will continue and the discussion, and we will hear from her. She has a wealth of information to share with us. So do stay tuned.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
And if you haven't checked out John Catt's books yet, you really need to do so. I bought one recently and I am thoroughly enjoying it. So everybody who's listening, those of you who are online, those of you who are live, welcome again. And it is indeed an honor to welcome tonight's guest, Miss Liz Free. And I do mean that. It is an honor. She is the CEO and director of the International School Rheintal, Switzerland. Liz has been a teacher, head teacher, and director in some of the world's leading schools, and was shortlisted for the TES International School Principal of the Year in 2024, so very recently. Alongside this work, Liz is a global board member for the TES and a strategic lead and trustee for the global charity Women Ed, with responsibility for Europe and Asia. Liz is an author, having contributed to the Amazon education bestseller Women Ed series in education leadership, and is a columnist with the TES. As a visible school leader, Liz advocates for the profession and speaks around the world on the theme of leadership development and the global school workforce as we strive to create outstanding learning for outstanding schools. What an incredible guest to have to end this two-part series on women in education. Liz, welcome and thank you so much for joining us on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, Michelle. And all of it sounded very glamorous, what you just said. However, I've just had the massive tech challenge of I was coming in on my Mac. I was all set with my headset, and now that didn't work. So I'm on my phone. So I hope the sound's okay. But anyway, Michelle, it's lovely to chat with you this evening. Switzerland calling.
You've got to ignore them for a moment. They need to give you a few minutes on your own. But thank you so much. We can hear you loud and clear, Liz. So
Okay,
thank
marvelous.
you so much. So tonight we will continue the discussion. And I was looking through one of the social media platforms, Liz, because, you know, I did some background checks and I saw this statement and it was on your platform. It said, girls, put your shoes on, there's glass everywhere. And that resonated with me. That for me was such a powerful statement, suggesting that we are smashing glass ceilings and we are making a difference to the education landscape. But the question is, at what rate? Are women across the board represented in this revolution? What else needs to be done to create a level playing field? And men, good to see some of you in line. We also encourage you to put your shoes on because there is glass everywhere. So, Liz, I can't begin to explain how thrilled I am to have you. And as I said, I've been looking through some social media and I've seen where several people have shared their experiences under your leadership and guidance. And just reading them gave me chills. And I'm like, wow, what an influence you've made. And it's so good, you know, that people are so open to share that. And it's good to know that women like you are out there punching those glass ceilings and making room for generations to come. So thank you. So first of all, Liz, can you tell us a little bit about your personal journey in education as a woman? What motivated you to pursue a career in this field?
And, you know, when I looked at the sort of things we were going to be talking about, I thought, what an interesting question to ask. Because would we ask a male colleague, what is your personal journey as a man in education? I don't know if we would. And
Maybe
so I would probably come from, first of all, what has been my journey through education, which is unique to me, of course. And I think there are aspects that are really important to consider when we look at gender equitable schools and how we create gender equity across the board. But I'll try and do a little snapshot. So I'm Welsh. I'm obviously in the Swiss mountains at the moment. But I grew up in Wales. I grew up in council house with social services and had not the easiest start in life. But I had great teachers. I had teachers who saw something in me at a very young age and advocated for me. And they were able to make it to a point where I was a first generation student to graduate from university and opened so many doors. And in fact, they opened the entire world to me. So I started teaching in Wales after I qualified and actually had my first headship, a junior school headship in Wales. And I was sort of coming to my late 20s and I was thinking, oh, I'm ready for an adventure. And I thought, well, if I'm going to have an adventure, let's really have an adventure. So I applied to schools in Africa and I applied to schools in the States. And I got a head of primary job at the British School of Boston in Massachusetts. I'd never even been to the States, which is quite funny now when I think about it. But off I went, and that began my journey into international education. And I'd say as a leader of schools now, having led many schools, and now as a CEO and director, is that I've been fortunate right from the age of 12, 13, 14 years old, right through to my age of my late 40s, where people have seen things in me and they've advocated for me. And I've had allyship and mentorship that has meant that I've been able on a huge global adventure. And I'm as excited now about education as I was when I became a teacher back in the late 90s.
Oh, thank you so much. Wow. It seems like a long time ago, but sometimes it doesn't really feel like, that long ago. And just a few things that you raised there, Liz, and you pointed out immediately, would we have asked a man that? How long have you been, or what's your journey? And I remember when I was doing one of my masters, that was one of my questions actually for both male and female leaders. And it was interesting because what I discovered is that the route for the men at the time, this was in the early 2000s, was much quicker and they got to that position really quickly. Whereas the female head teachers that I interviewed, the journey just seemed a little bit longer, hence my question. But that was really impressive. And the fact that you I was so confident to move overseas, coming from Wales as well, that is admirable. I did that when I packed up and left Jamaica in 2001 and moved to the UK, and what a culture shock, Liz. It's like, oh,
You went the other way.
I said, what did I sign up for? But it has been good. It has been good since. Thank you so much for that. So you've been in several settings, and you've worked across several settings, locally and internationally. Can you tell me some of the notable strides forward that women have made in education in recent years? And how have these advancements impacted the overall landscape, in your opinion?
And what was interesting when I did that research is that I could see massive disparity. Although we see in some sectors within education, women progressing more into senior leadership, what we're not seeing is that move into executive leadership in the same way. So it's almost like the glass ceiling has been pushed up another level. And I think that's what we see generation on generation. I'm really concerned about the continuing issue around women and girls in education. And it was interesting, I know I'm going off piste here, but last week I was at UNESCO, where we were exploring the Salamanca Agreement. It's 30 years since it was written around inclusive education. And there they had the Deputy Director General for UNESCO was talking about the issues for children accessing education. And last year I was shocked to hear that the numbers have actually increased last year from previous years. So we're seeing right across the board a major issue in education around equity in so many different ways. And it was interesting when you started this conversation, and you said that there are men listening as well. And actually, we are one profession, and
Yes.
we need everybody to be in this conversation. So I'm really glad that there are other people who, seeing the topic, are still willing to kind of tune in and engage in this conversation, because women and girls have a right to an education. And I'm just going to say it because it's something I feel very passionately about, particularly about Afghanistan, that we need to make sure that women and girls can access education, that they can access the STEM subjects, and that we advocate right from the very youngest age all the way through our profession, whether that's the people we serve as our students or whether that's the profession that we are responsible for as school leaders, to make sure we build capacity for the future. And that means we have to harness the potential of every single person. And I can see some amazing strides. However, things like the gender pay gap in some sectors, like the international education sector, it's got worse over the last couple of years. We're looking as a female principal and CEO, you would be earning, I think the figure's currently at about $24,500 difference when they look at like for like, both in terms of number of years of leadership, type of size of school of leadership, and number of years of teaching. So looking at direct correlations. If you happen to be not white and a woman, that gap increases to over $45,000. And so it's exactly the same job, you're just much cheaper. And so, yes, there have been strides. We're now seeing the global population in education is around 78% feminized, so it's female. And globally, the figure into senior leadership, so headship, is around 38 to 40%, depending on how you measure it. And so there are some countries, we look at some countries like Japan, where we see a different approach actually in this area, but we've got a long way to go. And I feel like we're in this political climate as well, particularly being in Europe, and when we look at other countries like the States, where we're seeing such increased polarization, that's also having an impact on how we move forwards equitably in our profession. So we've all got a duty of care. And I have to say that in my own journey, I've been strongly supported by both male and female colleagues. And I feel a duty of care to try and create a culture in my own community and in any way that I possibly can, so that we can empower other great leaders, whether male or female actually, to be able to realize their potential for the benefit of our young people.
Thank you so much, Liz. And you took it from a more global perspective, and I really appreciate that, because sometimes when we have these discussions, we tend to think about our own local context, and we only think about what's happening in the UK or where we are, and we forget what's happening around us. And I think it's so important that we keep that at the forefront of our minds as well, that the girls in Afghanistan and everywhere else in the world where girls are denied an education. I'm also happy that you've raised the point that this is not just about women, men also need to be a part of this discussion, and for things to happen and for things to shift in the right direction. I'm actually taken aback, though, Liz, that the gap is widening in parts, especially in terms of the pay gap. And I think with all the talk, you'd think that by this, the people would get the message, but there still seems to be that gap. Would you be able to expand on that a little bit for us, Liz, as to
it's really interesting. So I'm kind of, this is what I do in the summer holidays, is I explore this data. I have like a nerdy aspect to me. And because I want to know why. How is this possible? Because in my world, I'm coming across such amazing school leaders all of the time doing amazing things in their field. How are we still having these conversations, and how is this data still as it is? And it is complex, of course it is. There aren't easy answers, and of course you've got to look at countries, you've got to look at jurisdictions, you've got to look at areas within education. But if I look at the international education sector, which is obviously where I'm based, what we're seeing is kind of a polarization again in terms of the idea of kind of the trad and progressive debate that's hitting international education quite hard. So we see a rise of this exporting of British international schooling. And I always find that really interesting as a Welsh person, because there's no such thing as British international schooling, because there is no British curriculum. There is an English curriculum, there's a Welsh curriculum, there's a Scottish curriculum, and there's an Irish curriculum. And so these are all very different, fundamentally different, actually. And so, but there's this idea of a British education being a traditional education that's going out with the, franchised school groups going across the world. And it's growing massively, exponentially. And with that comes an idea of what effective leadership is. And of course, the people who are doing the recruitment of the CEOs and principals, who are they? Well, they're the boards. Who are the boards? Who are the decision makers? And that's where I think the understanding of what effective school leadership is, that we really need to address that at board level. And some of the organizations within the international sector are starting to do more, but we've got a long way to go. And I think accreditation bodies have got a really strong voice in this, in expectations around mission, vision, and values, which we're always talking in international education about equity, about global citizenship, and making sure that boards are held accountable for ensuring that the recruitment that they are empowered to lead, that they're living those values in how they're recruiting. And if we start to build that capacity and systemic knowledge, then I think that will be one of the contributing factors. Of course, the other is we have to empower women to know their value. And one of the things internationally, and I think this is a major contributing factor actually, is that packages is not like for like. It's not apples and apples that you're comparing. If you're in the UK sector, so if you're in England, you've obviously got pay scales, but of course there's still a massive gender pay gap in England, even with pay scales. I was just looking this morning, the Alliance for Education, there's a 26% mean average differential in male and female salaries in the UK. But at least there you know what you're dealing with. When you come internationally, it's not just about your pay or the pay spine. It's about the package that you get, the insurance that you get, the CPD that you get. Every time you move jobs, where are you being put on the pay spine? So I think the negotiation aspect within international education, you've got much more scope for negotiation. And what do we know about women as I hate generalizing, but I'm going to generalize, is that they're less likely to negotiate. They're less likely to do that. And so there's all these factors coming in, and the cumulative effect is that women are paid less.
Thank you so much. Liz, I'm just going to pause and welcome some people online and then just make mention of some of the things you raised just now. Oh my goodness, I would listen to you just continue speaking. This is so insightful. Tom, welcome. Thank you for joining. And Emily, thank you so much, fellow hosts and the CEO of Teachers Talk Radio is with us, Thank you so much.
Ooh, how exciting.
I know.
He's going to join us, join the conversation.
Oh, Tom will. I'm sure Tom will. He's given some insight from his perspective. Thank you so much. And Jamelia is still there. Thank you. Emily asked a question. She said, how can we ensure the package is fair? But you did mention about, the people responsible for the policies and the board of directors and so on. But she's asking, how can we ensure the package is fair, and how do we negotiate as women?
Great question. The truth is, as an individual, you can't. And I think the realization that it's not fair is the really good starting place for everybody. So when it comes to the international sector and the private sector, particularly, state systems are slightly different. Is one of the things is if you're looking at a school, is do they publish their pay scale? Number one, that's the first thing. And so if you've been invited for interview, that is a reasonable question to say that you'd like to have more information about the package. Could they send you the pay scale and also a sample salary slip? Because in the international sector, you need to be mindful of different taxation arrangements. You need to be mindful that not all countries or all organizations internationally will pay your pension, for example. So you might see somewhere in Asia, maybe in China, that has this amazing package. And you think, wow, I'm going to be earning double what I earned in the UK, for example. But actually, when you start to take into account all the things that you need to cover, so you have to take into health insurance, pension, cost of living indicators, taxation. I was in the Netherlands, percent tax benefit, because if you're paying 51% tax and you have children where the school fees are 25,000 a year, well, that's what 23,000 in tax that you'll have to pay per child. So these are things that you really need to consider. And what I would say, if anyone is considering going into the international sector, is to contact somebody that's already doing it and talk to them about the sort of schools you're going to, and they'll kind of give you some really key information about what to ask for and then how to negotiate at a later stage. Knowing your own value is really important. So talking to other people within that jurisdiction, so if you look in the Netherlands or China or Dubai, and getting an idea of what the landscape is like on the ground. And one of the things I love about education right across the board is I've never known anyone ask a teacher a question or ask for help or a colleague and them say no. If you say, I hear from a friend that you're working in Dubai, I'm thinking about moving to Dubai. If you've got 20 minutes that I can have a quick chat with you. In our profession, there's great generosity. And I think that's a really good place to start. So start with the people on the ground.
Thank you so much. And Emily said, thank you so much. That was helpful. And as women, sometimes, we're just embarrassed when it comes to talking about money and finances, and we'll do whatever it takes to avoid that sometimes. And even today, Emily, you can agree that came up in our conversation. So hopefully this response will help you in whatever decision you need to make. Liz, I have a question from Charlie. He says, it's really interesting. What do you think school teachers should do to prepare girls for the world of work and educate them on pay discrepancies and the challenges they will face? How should teachers support girls on that?
Oh, wow. That's a big one, isn't it?
Yes.
I think when we're looking at the design of curriculum is how are we creating opportunities to really interrogate data, and particularly at the moment when we're looking at the impact of AI, what is truth, what is knowledge, all these big questions, and making sure that in our curriculum we're having those conversations and we're open to having challenging conversations and to address difficult topics. And part of that is doing that within your classroom environment, because if you're creating a culture of safe space to interrogate difficult issues, you're encouraging opportunities for speaking and making sure that there's equitable voice in the classroom. If you find that there are girls and young women in your classrooms, and because you can see that they're academically or they're engaged in what you're doing and they're capable, they are bright, they're articulate, they're kind of soaking everything in, but they're not a voice in your room, then I think trying to find ways to encourage voice. One of the things that I think is really powerful, and I see this in the independent sector, particularly, as well as in the international independent sector, is the skills, these soft skills of public speaking, debating. They shouldn't be underestimated, because these are the skills that you then pull from when you have to have a difficult conversation. If you're uncomfortable talking about money, I slam because I'm British as well. That's also is a British thing. It's something we don't talk about. I think having those skills to know how to construct an argument, how to prepare yourself for those conversations, how to one of the things that I find really interesting is women often apologize They'll start
Yes.
with, I'm really sorry. And it's like, why are you sorry? What are you sorry about? Don't be sorry. Don't start with sorry. Don't start with apologizing. Don't make excuses. Be politely assertive. And I think if we can encourage that with our young people in our classrooms and we model it in how we interact in our schools, I think that gives really strong foundations.
Thank you so much. Key thing there for everybody who's listening and things to forward to others as well. As women, be politely assertive and stop apologizing. And you are so right. We start our conversation, sorry, but,
Yes.
yeah. Be
Or
polite.
I know you're really busy. That's often a one, isn't it? I find myself doing that. And when I do that, I'm like, everyone's busy. I've never met anyone in a school that's not busy.
Yeah.
But so polite though, polite, but really clear. And so that's the other thing actually, is giving yourself permission to have the time to think. When I see applications we get about 150 applications for every teaching position in my school. So if you think each application, you're spending seconds on, you're scanning them. And what I sometimes see is that, and it's really disappointing actually, but even now I see that particularly for leadership positions, I'll see that if I make generalizations from our male colleagues, I see that they've given themselves the time to really think about the school that they're coming to. Their letter of applications are really well thought through. And then as a generalism, when I look at women's applications, they're sometimes not as well constructed. And sometimes I know the women who are applying for these roles, and I've actually spoken to a few of them, and I said, I looked at your application, this is what I noticed. And what they always say to me is, Liz, do you know what? I was just so busy with school. I just rushed it at the end. I just didn't have time to do it. And so making sure that you give yourself permission as a woman, and if you're have got potential female leaders coming through and you're in a position where you're able to support this, is if you're seeing talent in your colleagues, if you're seeing potential, be that ally and give them permission, saying that you see that talent and that they should really go for that role. They'd be brilliant at it because they bring this, this, and this. And why don't they apply? And also, why don't they then send the application for you to have a quick look at?
Yes.
Because then what that does, the minute somebody else's eyes go on it, it gives permission again for them to put time into it. And that these are the little things that we can do that can just help along the way. It's like all things in life. It's not one thing that is suddenly going to solve this challenge for all of us. It's lots of these little things.
That is so interesting, Liz, because even just today, I had a conversation with a colleague at work, and she made the same point that as women, we don't get the time to do these applications and to do them properly. She's also Welsh, and she said her mother would often say to her, men keep women pregnant so that they're too tired to aspire to achieve their own goals. And she was relating that to the school setting. There's always so much to do as women, and then the family to take care of, that we don't spend time to think and to make these applications. Also, I think sometimes women are a little bit reluctant to open up to others, to have that second pair of eyes look over and judge their work as well, or their applications. And I think it's so important that school leaders create that safe space. And as you said, Liz, recognize talent, because that's something we are definitely struggling with. Recognizing talent and honing those skills and supporting colleagues to take it to the next level. And it's so important that school leaders do that. And I can tell that you do that, Liz, and we just hope we have some more leaders like you to help women to climb this ladder and smash these glass ceilings. Now, for those of you who are just joining, earlier, Liz said, it seems like the glass ceiling is being pushed up because, yes, women are stepping up into senior leadership, but those executive positions are still occupied primarily by men. So ladies, if you're listening, okay, let's take it another step up, another notch up, and go for those other roles as well. Thank you so much for that, Liz. And before we move on to the next question, just something else I picked up on from the previous discussion when you talked about being politely assertive. Don't you think, or haven't you seen where women who try to be assertive, were given names? We're formidable, we're aggressive, we're confrontational.
It's really interesting because I've got the chair of my board here in Switzerland, who is fabulous, absolutely wonderful man. He said to me after about me being here 6 months, he said, do you know what, Liz? You're a strong woman. And it was said with love, but what he meant is that I was loud and difficult. And we laughed about it. And I said, do you realize that when you say that, would you say that if it was the male CEO sat in here, oh, you're a strong man, being that you are assertive and that you get things done and you're impactful. And we had a really honest conversation. And because it was said with love, I knew that I could do that. And that's one of the things as well, is to challenge those assumptions. And again, to do it with politeness and firmly. I've learned that from some of my colleagues. I've got a friend who is Islamic and teaching in an international school in Geneva. And we often will just go for a coffee, like every couple of months I might be in Geneva, or we'll be somewhere where we're at a conference together. And she will also challenge my thinking. And I think trying to create a culture where it's not, you don't need to be fearful of saying the wrong thing when we're talking about difficult topics. Like, intersectionality, like gender, like race. It's okay to have conversations if it's coming from a place of, we all want to do better. All of us do. None of us have got it right in terms of absolute equity in our organizations. And so the people in power, or the people who have power, is they've got a duty of care to call it out.
Yeah.
When they see it, when they hear it, to make sure that we amplify voices of underrepresented groups. So, when we're in board meetings, when we're in staff meetings, making sure that you're using protocols that make sure that we hear every voice. It might not be the loudest member of staff in the room. It probably isn't. So how do you make sure that you bring those marginalized voices through and enable them to have a positive, visible role within your communities, and then challenge some of this language around being challenging and difficult. Now, I'm actually a redhead. Originally, I've gone kind of blonde and a bit grey now. But when I was in school, and I remember my head of sixth form saying to me, he's like, Liz, you're a typical redhead. And now I just think, wow, what a thing to have said. What was it that he was actually trying to say to me? Again, he was trying to say to me probably that I was opinionated. I knew my own mind. And those are things that we should celebrate, both in men and women. And as long as they're being harnessed for empowering all those around them. If they're using it as a power trip to put other people down, then that's a failure of leadership, regardless of what gender you are. So I think I try to model the leader I try to be my best self as a leader. I don't always get it right. I really don't. Yeah. But I'm also really honest about it and try to be. If I get it wrong, I'll say I've got it wrong. And I'm open to learning. And I want to model that with our community too. So it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because there are lots of assumptions. I went into one set in a conference in Northern England. It was one of the education research conferences. And a Japanese gentleman came into a session around the gender pay gap. But he came into the wrong session. So he was the only man in the room, bless him. And he then decided it was the right moment to tell us about the dragon ladies. That's what they refer to the name of principals in, or his particular cohort did, because he described them as angry women.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, wow, that's got a long way to go. So we had some really interesting conversations about how he experienced that. What was his determination of angry? And that was it because it was behaviors associated with a woman, or was it a woman? What was that about? And I think having different representations of leadership is at the heart of this. Yes. There isn't one way to lead. And there are masculine traits, though I don't like the idea of it, but it is true. There are masculine traits and there are feminine traits. And we're all a mix of all of them. Mm-hmm. And I'd really hope that we have head teachers and leaders, that the way that I lead will be different to the way that somebody else in my organization will lead, or somebody else in another school. And the question is not, are they fitting a mold? It's what impact are they having in their community? And how are they empowering the young people around them? And then we can start to unpick, okay, what are they doing? How are they doing it? And that's what I try to turn those conversations around, because you can very easily get into quite a negative space, because it's a challenging situation to still be having conversations about gender equity in 2024.
Yeah. And we're hoping that in a few years' time, we'll make some serious gains, further gains with all these conversations. And Liz, just two things that gentleman, I think he ended up inadvertently, but in the right session, because hopefully he learned some truth.
He was lovely. Yes, we had a good conversation.
and also, little did that person know that your redhead was your superpower, huh? Now he knows. Now he knows. Thank you so much for that comprehensive discussion. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. In the meantime, everybody, please remember to download the Podbean app and call or send us your messages. Let's talk it out. Stay tuned.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Okay, so there we have it. Once again, make sure to check out John Catt's books. Liz, welcome back, and thank you so much. You've given us a wealth of information to take away, and I'm sure I'm going to go back and listen to the show again and make some more notes. Now, the question I'm about to ask, we've actually discussed aspects of it, and that is, despite progress, what are some significant hurdles or challenges that women still face in the field of education today? And I'm going to go over to Vivian Porrid, who wanted to join us, but she has another commitment, and she's also from the same organization. And just she sent her opinions, and I'm going to read this, Liz, and then feel free to expand on some of the points. She said, firstly, progress is still far too slow, and the representation of women leaders across education is disproportionate to their presence in the workforce. And we've got statistics to support that. And she said, your organization focused on 4 key challenges that women educators and leaders face. 1, equitable representation in leadership roles, especially senior roles. And you've mentioned earlier, Liz, executive. 2, representation of more diverse women in leadership roles, especially senior roles. And in the last show, this is something I didn't get to develop, so would like to talk about that a little bit more as well. She mentioned increase in flexible working practices. So some of the challenges, reduction in the gender pay gap. Then she pointed out that underlying these challenges are inequitable systemic issues. For example, gender stereotypes, the motherhood penalty, which I'd like you to elaborate on first, Liz, the second shift women experience in the home and the family, bias and discrimination. So I underlined the motherhood penalty because that's something I'd love for you to expand on, or anything else that Vivian mentioned.
Oh, wow. Whenever you follow the Porritt, it's always a challenge, because she's really quite an extraordinary woman. And there's so much in what she was just covering there. Okay, so the motherhood penalty, what do we know? Well, we know that women who are mothers are more likely to leave the profession. We see massive attrition in the 40s to 50s age group right across the world. Interestingly, we're also seeing increased attrition of men in the profession as well. That was again discussed at UNESCO last week. So that's also something for us to really consider. The motherhood penalty hits in so many different ways. It hits in terms of pension. So it's not just about the pay that you're experiencing in the moment, which is less than a male colleague, but you also get hit on pension quite significantly. There's also the challenge around this very idea of what school leadership should be, and this idea that you have to be available at all times for all things. And I'm a mum. I've got a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I've worked in full-time education director positions since I was pregnant with them and all the way through. And what I've learned through that is that I have to be really clear about what I'm prepared to do and what I'm not prepared to do. And to also understand what that means for me might be different for somebody else with a child. But this idea of flexible working, it's not just about part-time and full-time hours, although that is a consideration, but how you work. So the way that I work is Monday to Friday, I am all about school. So the fact that I'm sat here at 7:44 in the evening in my office, in my school with I've got a nice sheep sat next to me, a model sheep. Because that's what I do, is I work the long hours because I have a lot to get through and a lot to do with my role and my community. But at 4 o'clock on a Friday, I finish. I don't read emails on the weekends. I don't work on the weekends unless there's something catastrophic. But that is the time for me when I then revert into mum mode, and I completely focus on mum mode. If there's an exceptional situation where I need to communicate with staff or I'm doing something on the weekend, I always time my emails to go at 7:30 on a Monday morning. I make it really clear to my staff that I don't expect them to work. I don't want them to work on the weekend. However, if for them working on a Sunday afternoon means they can go to the gym every day at 4:30, and that works better for them in their life, whatever their circumstances is, then go for that. And that's absolutely fine too. I come from an assumption that everybody that works in my school works hard, and they do. So they don't need to prove it to me. And I also don't want martyrs. Because when we get to martyrs, and that's what we see particularly with women as they get into this age 40, 50 category, you get a culmination of multiple factors. The yes factor, where they just keep saying yes, 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 because they're often good, which means they get huge workloads. Combine that with often, if they do have children, you end up with teenage children and predominantly elderly parents. Throw in the menopause as well, and I've just hit perimenopause, and it's completely freaking me out how complex this is. So I'm all up for a conversation around that. I'm doing it.
That sounds like a main show.
Yeah, this is not good. So but all those things they all hit at that moment. And so, and bearing in mind, we're like I said, 78% of the workforce. So what percentage of our workforce at any time are going through perimenopause and menopause, teenage children, elderly parents? We also know following COVID that the demand on the balance of domestic working has again increased the proportion for women. Again, it was discussed at UNESCO last week, and the impact on families and homes. So when we look at the motherhood penalty, in some ways it should be the motherhood and fatherhood, because we're now in many of the countries that we're working in, we're in alleged equitable societies. My husband took my maternity leave when I had my children. I was in England then, and that was wonderful for us. I took 5 months, and then he took the rest of the whole year. So we were able to share that together, and it was amazing for me. It was amazing for my husband, and most importantly, it was amazing for my children. So I think it's a very long answer to your question about the motherhood penalty, is organizations, if we really value the talent that we have, is find out every single way of how do we know what that individual member of staff can bring to the organization and what is the best fit for them that enables us to keep that expertise in the profession. It might not be in our school, but within the profession, and empower us as organizations to think flexibly about the roles that we have. What does it mean to be a leader? When does that happen? How, because a lot of people, when they think about education, they're like, well, we've got these lessons on these days and therefore it can't be flexible. Well, the actual delivery of lessons, there's as we all know, a whole load more that goes with that. The planning, the preparation. Well, how do we do that? Can we do that in a more interesting way? So I think being open to listening to your community and not getting to the point where we have women in crisis that then leave the profession. These are the most experienced, highly skilled practitioners. And if they're falling out of our profession, that's a failure on our part.
Thank you so much, Liz. And listen, we're loving the comprehensive answers because we're all learning from that. And it's interesting that you mentioned the 40s and 50s and that, they face all these other external challenges and therefore sometimes leave the profession with a wealth of experience and a wealth of knowledge. So on the back of that, Emily's asking me, how did I balance working as a mom? And Emily, it was not easy. I had to rely on the village to come through. When I had my daughter, my mom took 2 years off work so that she could look after her, so that I could resume work and do my bachelor's degree. So it really took a village. And then when I had my son as well, I had to rely on the community because I then had my son, decided to do my master's, and I was juggling work, my master's, a toddler, and a daughter in primary school. And I just got it done. But as I said, I had to depend on lots of other women around me to support me with that. And, Liz said, set your timetable. The weekend is yours. Leave the work at school. And unless it's a crisis, as Liz said, but we just have to do that, and to create our own schedule as well, to keep on top of it. And then, Liz, I'll have you know that on this platform, we've got Emily, and in her school, they offer menopause leave. So maybe that's something to consider.
I don't have time. I love it. And actually how interesting, and having menopause policies, that's really important to consider. And again, we've known that for a long time, even in the design of our building. It's really interesting. We've just been involved in a new campus build. So we had a 40 million investment, and we just opened our new campus in the summer. And even then we were having conversations about the environment and the impact of the environment for women in menopause. So even the air circulatory systems and being able to regulate the temperature in different ways, in different spaces, they seem such little things, but the architect, it nearly blew his mind. He was like, we've never heard of such things. And I was like, welcome to education.
Wow. The architecture for well-being purposes. I love that. I love that. And I think schools should really listen in here and make some adjustments, because, it's not easy times, the perimenopausal years. But we get by, and we're resilient, and we try our best.
Michelle, I've got a question for you. I'd like to know, because you just described a stage in your life when you did your master's. I think, were you working at that time as well? And you had 2 young children. Yes. So when you got through that phase in your life, which I can imagine that you were in it and you just did it with all of that support around you, but it was kind of very focused time. What was the impact of that after you got through it? Did you go through a period of maintaining that pace, or did you slow down? What happened after your master's?
Okay, so my children happen to be online, and I'm sure they'll agree, Liz, that I still haven't slowed down yet.
I love that.
As we speak, I'm doing my doctorate. So, yes.
So you still keep going.
My daughter's online, Jamelia. She just said, nope, she has not.
I love that, Jamelia. That's your mum. Your mum is what an amazing role model, to be active, to be always learning and thirsty for knowledge. You're a great. Your mum's a great role model. For both of you.
Oh, she said, absolutely. Thank you so much, Liz. But yes, but what I've done, though, over the years is that I know when to pause and give my children the time. And so there was a point where, because I was supposed to have done my doctorate years ago, but then it was time for my daughter to do university and sixth form and so on. And I took that time so I could commit to her and give her all the resources that she needed. Now that she's a qualified professional and my son is about to start his final year at university, I thought, right, now I'll pick up the doctorate. So I still haven't stopped yet, Liz. Perimenopause has nothing on me. I keep going.
And I love that, because it's a great model for how we can move forward. I think it's really interesting as to how we continue to look after our women that often go through higher level study. We see that right across the profession as well. And particularly those going into leadership, we see that women are more qualified for many of the roles that they go into. So they're more likely to have a master's than male colleagues when they go into senior leadership and executive leadership. And I think that's a really interesting idea about how we ensure equity in that as well, and we're really clear about what the expectations are for different parts of our roles that we have. How did the school support you, Michelle, when you were doing all of this? Was the school able to support you through that process?
I just got on with it. The school was very supportive in the sense that if I needed to go into university maybe early one afternoon, that they were willing to cover me. But to be honest, I didn't talk about it much. I just made sure that I balanced the working hours and the time I needed to get to central London. And so I didn't really seek much help. And, Liz, I am a night owl, and I was telling
Me
Emily that
too.
that's when the creative juice flows for me. So, daytime, I'm up and running around school, teaching, doing all sorts, telling off kids. And then at night, that's when I write and do my best writing. So, I've never really had to ask for time off. To be honest, I depended a lot on those outside of school because I would leave university. Sometimes I'm home at 9, 10, picking up my son and my daughter from the minder, who was very understanding. So that's where I got most of the support, to be honest. Now that I'm doing my doctorate, I approached the school and I said, listen, I'm going to need your support, gathering data and so on. I don't think they took me seriously. So I'm just decided, right, I'll get on with it. And when I'm ready to gather data, I'll go and have that conversation again. And even when I said it, there wasn't a discussion. Like, so, you know, what is it about, Michelle? And how can it help us as a school? We didn't have that conversation. So hopefully, as I get more involved in the degree, then I'll get more support when the time is needed. Liz, Charlie said, if you think the conversations would be different if men had the same issues with menopause.
Do you know, I think every school would be built with windows that you can open in every classroom. But I mean, I'm laughing, but actually it is a serious conversation. And, you know, in everything, when I look at the design of our campus, I remember being sat in multiple rooms full of men from all kinds of different aspects of the building project, from architects to project managers to landscapers, you know, interior designers. So we've also got to make sure that, particularly when we're talking about schools, which obviously we serve an equal population in terms of gender, but our workers are predominantly female, we need to be mindful of that. I'm also interested in because one of the things I've learned through my career is that when I was in my early career, I said yes to everything. And that served me well because it opened doors. If I saw something interesting coming through the post, there's an opportunity to get funding to go and work for NASA for a month. Then I thought, that's an interesting thing, let's do that. And I filled in the form and got it, and off I went to NASA. Oh, there's an opportunity to do this, to go and see the European Parliament and do a unit of work on that. So off I went to do that. So I said yes, probably for about 15 years. Okay. And then the problem I realized is that I'd said yes so much, from looking at master's level study to writing to being on boards of things. And as time went on, I got more and more things. And I always felt then, when I was in a position of leadership, that I have a duty of care to say yes when I'm offered something. But what I've learned now at this point in my life is that I have to be really discerning. And I now, if I say yes to something now, I then say no to something else. So I've realized now that I'm at the capacity point, and that if I overreach, then I either end up working beyond a reasonable amount, which has an impact on the things I care about in my life, or I don't have the impact that I would really like. It's not making a difference. And the reason I became a teacher is because I wanted to make a difference. So I think that that's an interesting point about where you are in your career, and at what point do you take the opportunities that come because you can, and at what point you start to be more discerning in what you do and what you don't do.
Yeah, totally agree. And sometimes the opportunities come and we second guess ourselves as women. I mean, I've done that before, even though Jamila is saying, yep, Mom, you're a workaholic, and that's why you keep going. And Emily's saying, I shouldn't just say Jamila is now a professional, but I should state that she's in an excellent profession. She's in law, because Emily's point is that I did such a good job.
Well done you, and well done
as a single mom as well. As a single mom, Liz, I didn't have the partner who's going to take some leave and support, but we got through it. So just to get back to some of the questions, and we've actually answered the ones I have here for this section. So I'm just going to skip, Liz, and go to intersectionality. So the question is, so intersectionality plays a crucial role in understanding the experiences of women in education. The question is, how can we ensure that our efforts toward gender equality are inclusive and address the diverse needs of all women, regardless of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, or other identities, and especially for Black and ethnic minority women? How can we ensure that they're involved in this evolution?
I think the most important thing that I've learnt when I listen to my colleagues is that we need to listen to understand, so that means you have to. We have to provide spaces where we can learn from underrepresented groups in our communities, in our education community. And so that's lots of ways, isn't it? It's providing safe spaces, providing forums, actively going to and not assuming that people will come to you. So one of the things often heads will say is, I've got an open door policy. Well, that's all well and good, but there's a power dynamic. And is somebody going to really step through your door to ask you about becoming a leader, or whether they should do a middle leadership program? And so I think the duty of care is to be aware, to be open, to be willing to have active recruitment practices. One of the things, and we haven't got this right in my own school, we're still doing more work in this area because I'm in an international school. I've got an international student population that's incredibly diverse, and I have a diverse staff population. But in terms of particularly of Black members of staff, I don't have many. I have maybe I think I have one member of staff that's Black, and two. I've got two, and what I'd say is that that's not representative of the rest of our community. So I've got to do better. And one of the things I've started to do is it's all the usual stuff. Was the first step is looking at obviously your websites, looking at how you come across to somebody that's never come across your school. I write on the top of the application that we welcome applications from underrepresented groups in international education. I spend time and I talk to other international school leaders who have come from marginalized and underrepresented groups in this field, and try to work out what are the things that can make a difference. And I just feel like we're not there. We're nowhere close, are we? And when we look at the data, it's scary, actually.
Yeah, but efforts are being made, and that's what's important. And that is why we need to really open up the discussion and not be uncomfortable about it, because, if we continue to feel uncomfortable, we will never be able to break those barriers. And Vivian sent me a lovely quotation from Maya Angelou. She said, yes, Maya Angelou, you know the one. We all should know that diversity makes for a rich tapestry, and we must understand that all the threads of the tapestry are equal in value, no matter what their color. And then when I read that, I thought about the unconscious biases and how can we address that? As a leader of a school, are there programs in place for leaders, the ones who make up the panel? How do you work to overcome those unconscious biases?
So one of the lots of different things that we do actually is we take off even really simple things, is trying to take off photographs from applications. I'm working at the moment to try and work out how we deal with certification on HR processes, because there's inherent bias when we look at which universities, because then they reveal which countries applicants have come from. And I've noticed significant bias against applicants from African countries. And in an international school, I want teachers from African countries. I want teachers from every continent in the world. So I think we have to really think at the recruitment practices and how we try to remove the issue of recruitment panels recruiting like for like. Whether that's conscious bias or unconscious bias, in a way, it doesn't really matter what the bias is, or it's important to understand. I think that's something that we need to work really hard on, because just like I was saying, you've got to look at, if boards are looking at CEOs and recruiting CEOs and principals, they've got to have a real deep understanding of what effective leadership is and to really challenge their ideas. So do school leaders, so heads and leadership teams that are recruiting teachers have to do exactly the same thing, don't we? We have to really think what makes an effective teacher. If they've been trained in the University of Zambia and a teacher training college there, is that treated equally as if they've been trained in Canterbury? Those kind of questions. And it's really interesting because there is a natural bias towards what you know. That's a natural human reaction. And so that's something that we're considering here at the moment is should we, that's a question we're asking, is should we just put, that they've got a bachelor's or they've got whatever equivalents of national recognized teacher training, QTS.
Yeah.
Is that the right way forward to try and so you get more people through to that final stage of interview? And because one of the challenges, what people will often say is, oh, well, we didn't get the applicants. Or they just weren't strong enough. We didn't put them through. There weren't enough. It wasn't a strong field.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of comments. So I think that's something that we're looking at as to how we can try and find as many ways as possible to be equitable through the process, as well as making ourselves attractive in the first place. And we have seen a difference in the last 3 years. We've seen a difference of the profile coming through, but we're still got a way to go.
Yeah. But it's good that the discussion is happening and that measures are being put in place. And Viv said, and just to support that, in education, students need to see themselves represented in the face, background, qualities of their teachers and leaders, and we do them a disservice if they see all white male leaders. A significant body of research demonstrates improvements in culture, outcomes, and well-being if our workforce was more diverse and valued for this. And that just sums up really well what you've said, Liz. And I'm just going to share briefly before we take the news, my experience. I moved to the UK in 2001. At that point, I had a teacher's college diploma, having trained to become a teacher for 3 years. And I also had a B.Ed in English education and 8 years of experience. I moved to the UK and we were classed as unqualified teachers and placed at the bottom of the pay scale.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
And in order to move onto the main scale, then we had to do our QTS. Now, I had absolutely no problem doing a QTS and qualifying for the British curriculum. Well, you even mentioned what is British curriculum, so for the British curriculum, so to speak. But it was that title that was attached, unqualified. So 8 years of experience and all these credentials. And then we came, and because our degree was in the Caribbean, it was regarded as not as strong. Wow. Even though the University of the West Indies is one of the top universities and only 1% of the population makes it there. So a number of teachers went home. They're like, no.
So sad, isn't it? So short-sighted.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just the labeling. Just remove that language and you will get lots of people who would stick around and who are so qualified. But yeah, just some of the things and some of the things that we need to continue to work on in education. We're going to take a short break for the news. And I'm doing the news rather early this week, Liz, because I want to spend some more time on the discussion. So do stay tuned, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Remember to download the app, the Podbean app, and get in touch. Please stay tuned.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC News channel and news website features an interview with a secondary head teacher 1 year on from an incident in his school which resulted in a lockdown. Head teacher Kieran Stapleton confronted a male who had entered the school building, telling office staff he had a gun. The man has since been detained indefinitely in a secure psychiatric hospital. Mr. Stapleton talks of confronting the man on the corridors while staff followed lockdown procedures, locking classrooms, pulling down blinds and asking pupils to hide under desks and remain calm and silent. Mr. Stapleton used the interview to highlight the issue of mental health and the importance of support for young people in order to avoid instances of violence. He also pointed to the bravery of staff and pupils and the way they responded to the lockdown that was not a drill. The business section of the BBC News site focuses on the impact the post office scandal has had on the children of sub-postmasters. A group set up to support those affected was organised by Katie Downey, whose father was made bankrupt trying to repay money after the Horizon system failed. Ms Downey was 11 when the family moved to France, and she stopped talking for 2 years. She set up the group Lost Chances for the Children of Sub-Postmasters as a way to support those affected, but is also trying to gain compensation for the changed lives. The group has 40 members so far, and many talk of difficult home lives, bullying at school, and feelings of shame after parents were accused. Some also shared experiences of poor mental health, eating disorders, and panic attacks. The group wants members of the public and other groups and agencies to understand how such trauma can affect children and young people. This is so that they are no longer considered as too remote from the harms caused, simply because the harm was not directly inflicted upon them. The holy month of Ramadan began earlier this month, and many schools have made arrangements to support pupils and staff who are fasting. This is something that many schools have done for years, but this year staff shortages have meant that some schools have had to modify their usual procedures. Schools report difficulties in supervising pupils who are fasting in spaces away from food and drink, as they struggle to find additional staff or enough cover for absent staff. One primary school in the east of England resorted to asking parents to take fasting pupils home for the lunch period due to significant staff shortages. Parents expressed frustration at the request, with some quoted by East England News as saying it was insensitive and ridiculous. Some did point out that the school has often been supportive in the past and that it is proud of its multicultural awareness. The school said it was working hard to find a solution to the issue, but could not compromise pupil safeguarding. Difficulties in recruitment, retention and accessing supply staff are an ongoing challenge for many schools. The University of Cambridge is scrapping its state school targets for undergraduate admissions, according to the Telegraph newspaper. The university said it would take candidate schools into account when selecting students, but would no longer have a target for the share of state and private schools pupils gaining places. Cambridge has been accused of discriminating against pupils from private schools amid a decline in offer rates at top independent schools. Vice-Chancellor Deborah Prentice said there is no discrimination, but competition is fiercer as state school pupils have been increasingly encouraged to apply. The targets were originally introduced to increase the portion of state-educated undergraduates from 63.4% to 69.1% by 2024-25. The university has beaten its target with 72.9% of new students in 2022-23 coming from state schools. Finally, a head teacher's letter to parents on the subject of poor quality school meals has gone viral. The letter was sent after issues with the school's catering provider, Chartwell's, led to complaints from pupils over quality and portion sizes. In the letter, the head teacher says he would be exceptionally unhappy if his own children were served the food, and asks, how difficult is it to bake a potato? Whilst the letter focuses on issues with food service, it has highlighted the problems schools face around private finance initiative contract management, funding issues and the impact inflation has had on the food prices, which have left some companies struggling. Some commentators have also raised the issue of the impact poor quality meals can have on pupils who receive free school meals. It's not the first time Chartwell's has been in the news, as the issue of food quality was raised during the pandemic, when the company was accused of providing poor quality food parcels to families during school closures. Chartwell's said it was working with the school to rectify issues and acknowledged that the service had fallen well below the high standards we demand. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Thank you so much, Jo. Liz, I'm sure it must be interesting hearing the challenges your fellow colleagues in the UK are facing.
I was having a moment thinking about the jacket potatoes. I've not had a jacket potato for years. A bit of Hinds baked beans and a bit of cheddar cheese.
There you go. Or whatever beans you fancy.
You wouldn't believe the things when you live internationally, the things
Yeah.
you miss from home.
Yes.
It's bizarre. There's things that you wouldn't even normally eat at home. So like, I live obviously in Switzerland where we're like the home of chocolate, but I crave Cadbury's fruit and nut, which the Swiss are appalled by. But yeah, good old jacket potato. Yeah, how can you get a jacket potato wrong? That's an interesting question, isn't it?
I know. It's weird and wonderful things. And for those of you who are listening, if you're not a fan of the chocolate that Liz mentioned, there are many other brands you can help yourselves to. Liz, I went to a conference recently and I went to the women's panel group. And some of the women were actually complaining that sometimes it's the female head teachers who hold back the progress of other women. So my question is, how can we cultivate supportive networks and mentorship opportunities for aspiring female educators and leaders? How can we ensure that whether you're male or female, you did mention some of that in the programs that we could offer, but if you could expand on that, please.
Well, first of all, anyone in a position of leadership has a duty of care to empower those around them and to realize the potential of those around them. So any kind of leadership style that is disempowering is a failure of that leadership. And I find it really sad and disappointing that any woman would not help to pave the way for women that come with them and alongside them. So I find that really sad and disappointing. Do we all have examples of that? Yes, we do. It's sad, but it's true. And again, when I talk about kind of how do we use the power that we have to challenge inappropriate behaviors and call it out. I know that's really difficult if you're an early career teacher because the power balance isn't there sometimes. What I would say is, if you are able to speak with people directly, if you're able to do that, it's not always possible, and identify for that particular person what it is about their behaviors that is disempowering for you as an individual. And sometimes people don't realize the impact that they have on other people. And especially if you're living internationally, you've got massive cultural differences that are coming in all the time. How we sit, the body motions that we have, the facial expressions that, as Brits and Americans, we tend to have quite expressive, and our Italian colleagues, I'm making sweeping generalizations again. However, other cultures might be much more reserved, and that can be interpreted as meaning something else, but it may not be that. So I would always come from the first position of that everyone's intention is pure and positive. And if we come from that intention, then I think trying to find ways to have conversations about what type of leadership we want to have and what type of leadership we want to experience. And that's kind of the positive approach that I take on it. The other side, quite frankly, if you're in an organization where the leadership is not empowering you to be able to be as effective as you can be in your role, and you can't change it, then it's time to move on to a place where you can thrive and where you can make a difference. That would be my advice. So try to change it if you can. Try to live with it if you can, and if you can't, leave and leave fast.
It has been so awesome, and I just like to do some shout outs myself before actually, Liz, before I do my shout outs, what final words would you like to share with women out there who are aspiring to be leaders? I didn't send you this question, so you'll have to think on the spot. Leave them with something. Aspiring leaders, especially your women.
I'd say be bold, be courageous, and know that you only get to greatness through failure as well. So be okay with giving something a go, and it might work and it might not, but all of those putting yourself out there will get you closer to where you can potentially be. And the biggest thing you can do is build your professional network. Reach out to other leaders that inspire you, that you're interested in, even just people that you can connect with on LinkedIn, and just say, can I have a conversation with you 3 times a year? So that would be my biggest piece of advice. Build your network and then use it.
Oh, fantastic. And I'm taking all these on board as well. Be bold, be courageous, listening ladies and gentlemen. Be bold, be courageous. To get to greatness, there has to be some failure, and there will be. A network. If Emily's still online, she is the queen of networking, and I've been learning from her as well. And so as we draw to a close, I just want to do some shout outs as well. And I want to make mention of 3 stalwarts in education who are now sadly deceased. And the first one is Mavis Gilmore, former Minister of Education in Jamaica, who inspired me while I was in primary school to become a teacher. We've got Miss Mina McLeod, former president of the YWCA in Jamaica, who gave me the opportunity to travel and represent the island, attending various conferences for women, and showed me that barriers can be broken. We've got Miss Ivy White and Miss Norma Darlington, both from my Teachers College, who instilled the values of strength, grace, integrity, tenacity, and poise, and gave me opportunities to lead at the tender age of 18. And of course, to all the women and men out there who continue to chip away at these invisible barriers that hold back true potential, thank you. And most importantly, my mother, a true advocate for education. And to all the strong women in my life, friends and family, and of course, now my new friends, Liz and Vivian, thank you so much. And my beautiful daughter, a symbol of strength and tenacity. Thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your questions. And Liz, thank you so much. I don't think I have enough words to say how much I appreciate you coming on the show tonight and for sharing with us so honestly and so openly. I appreciate that. And I'm sure that lots of people will be listening when we download this because it has been insightful. I feel it's like I can go on and just take on the world.
Yes, do it.
Yeah. I feel like I can see an opportunity and I won't be questioning and checking the job description and ticking the bits I can do and think, oh, I maybe can't do the rest. That's how you've empowered me tonight. And Charlie said, great show. Great. See you next time. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Mom, I know you're listening over there, and Dad in Kingston, Jamaica. Thank you so much. They are my biggest cheerleaders. Thank you. And do tune in again for another engaging discussion. And stay tuned to Teachers Talk Radio. Have a lovely evening. Thanks again, Liz. Have a good night.
Thank you, Michelle. It was great fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.